"I am sorry, Nina. I broke your heart and fell in love with another woman when I got to America. I broke your love. But I have money now, and I am willing to pay you back for everything you did for me back then. I love my fiancée, and I can't leave her to be with you. Just name your price, and I will pay." That was what Kelvin told Nina on his return from America. After all the sacrifices Nina made for him, sacrificing her dreams, giving him a kidney after his own failed, he was now returning with another woman and now wants to pay her off for all that she had sacrificed for him. Nina was not always the prettiest girl in her class. In fact, she rarely crossed anyone's mind at all. She existed quietly in the background, and people hardly noticed her when they were not trying to make fun of her. She was just another poor girl who had gotten a scholarship into a school that was never meant for people like her, people whose parents didn't have influence, money, or names that opened doors. The school was known for one thing: wealth. It was a place where children of politicians, oil magnates, influential lawyers, and businessmen gathered, wearing privilege like a second skin. Their parents mattered in society. Their surnames carried weight. Meanwhile, Nina's parents were nobodies by society's cruel standards. Her father was a carpenter at the market, his hands permanently roughened by years of cutting wood and lifting heavy planks under the hot sun. He smelled of sawdust and sweat when he came home every evening, his clothes faded and frayed at the edges. Her mother sold pap and akara by the roadside in front of their small house, waking before dawn every day to soak and grind beans by hand because they couldn't afford a grinding machine. By the time the sun rose, her mother's hands were already oily, her feet dusted with red sand, her voice hoarse from calling out to passers-by. If not for the scholarship Nina had earned through her musical talent, there was no way she would have stepped into that school, let alone mingled with people who lived such different lives from hers. Sometimes, even walking through the school gates made her feel like an intruder, like she was trespassing in a world that didn't want her. While her classmates wore flashy clothes to school, designer shirts, imported shoes, expensive watches, Nina wore thrift clothes she had struggled with at least 10 other women to get at the market. Clothes that smelled faintly of dust and other people's lives, clothes she had washed over and over again until the colors dulled and the fabrics softened from wear. While other students changed outfits daily, Nina was often seen wearing the same set of clothes again and again, carefully washed and neatly ironed, hoping no one would comment on it. But they always did. They whispered when she walked past. They laughed behind their hands. Some were bold enough to say it to her face. "Is that the only dress you have? Scholarship girl. See how she walks like she's afraid to touch anything." The students mocked her because of her status. No one wanted to be friends with her. She ate alone, sat alone, and moved alone, always careful not to take up too much space. And because of the way the world treated her, because of how it constantly reminded her that she didn't belong, she recoiled into a shell she built for herself. A shell where silence felt safer than words. Where invisibility felt like protection. She was always quiet during classes, rarely raised her hand, and never volunteered answers, even when she knew them. She didn't interact much with her classmates, and eventually, people stopped trying to interact with her, too. Nina told herself she didn't mind. She hadn't come to the school to make friends or impress anyone. She was there for one thing: to sharpen her musical prowess. And to win the international recording deal awarded to the best student in the school. That dream was what kept her going on days when the mocking felt too heavy. It was what she clung to when she walked home with tired legs, her stomach growling, her bag lighter than everyone else's. Music was her escape. Music was her language. It was the one place where poverty didn't matter, where class didn't define worth. Even though she didn't want the world to notice her, Nina had a gift, something so rare and so raw that it was impossible to ignore forever. She could play almost every musical instrument with an ease that startled even her teachers. Piano, guitar, violin, drums, give her time and she would master it. She could hear a sound from far away and name the note instantly. She could recreate melodies she'd heard only once, her fingers moving with instinct rather than effort. Music lived in her bones. And that was what made Kelvin notice her. Kelvin was the son of the wealthiest man in their community, a boy who had never known what it meant to be told no. He was popular on campus, the kind of popularity that came with influence, not just charm. He spent money like there was a fountain of it flowing endlessly in his backyard. He arrived at school in different flashy cars every week, sometimes driving himself, sometimes stepping out while chauffeurs held the door open. Everyone wanted to be his friend. Girls fluttered around him like moths to light, laughing too loudly at his jokes, finding excuses to brush against him. The boys idolized him, desperate for his attention, willing to do almost anything to be seen in his circle. Teachers treated him with careful politeness, aware of who his father was. But despite all of that, Kelvin had a genuine love for music. He didn't just want to dabble in it or use it as a hobby to look cool. He wanted to be a musician, wanted to take over the world with his sound, just like Don Jazzy, Davido, and Wizkid. He spent hours in the studio, tried different beats, and worked with producers his father paid generously. Yet, something was missing. His lyrics were terrible. No matter how hard he tried, they felt empty, like there was something he was missing. Every time he tried to write a song, he felt like he was standing outside a door he couldn't open, watching something real happen on the other side without being able to reach it. He had everything, paid studio sessions, the right music instruments, yet his words lacked depth. When he finally began to notice Nina's musical prowess, he knew that he had finally found an answer to his problems. He began watching her during music practicals, noticing how she closed her eyes when she played, how her fingers moved as they were just an extension of the instrument. How the room always seemed to quiet down when she performed, even students who usually didn't care about anything suddenly paying attention. A part of him whispered that she held the solution to what his lyrics could be lacking, and he had been right. But the day he finally mustered the courage to speak to her to help him out, she instantly denied his request. "Why don't you want to help me?" he asked, confusion tugging at him like a second face. No one had ever told him no in his life, and her response felt both foreign and strange. "I am not here to tutor anyone," she told him, grabbing her bag and heading for the door. "I am here to learn." But deep down, she knew why she didn't want to help him out. She knew boys like Kelvin. They were stuck-up people who always thought that the rest of the world was beneath them. They always mocked her every morning she came to school, and she couldn't afford to get close to any one of them, let alone be their tutor. But Kelvin didn't give up. He kept pestering her, and each time he was met with the same response. No. And so, one afternoon during lunch break, he noticed Nina sitting alone at the far end of the cafeteria, eating quietly with her head bowed. Her food was simple, rice and stew packed from home, but she ate it like she was grateful for every bite. Kelvin walked up to her, wearing a broad smile that caused her to roll her eyes. The entire cafeteria seemed to freeze. Conversations dropped. Forks paused mid-air. Eyes widened. Some students smirked, certain that Kelvin had decided to join in mocking Nina. They expected laughter, insults, maybe even a public humiliation that would send her running out in tears. They waited eagerly. But what Kelvin did next shocked all of them. "Can I sit here?" he asked. Nina stared at him, her spoon hovering over her plate. "No," she wanted to say at first, not wanting to be an object for mockery that afternoon. But for some weird reason, she found herself nodding. And for Kelvin, that felt like a victory he hadn't expected. Kelvin's smile grew even wider as he sat down. He didn't say anything else to her that day. He simply opened his food and ate quietly, stealing glances at her from the corner of his eye. Nina's hands shook slightly as she continued eating, her senses on high alert. She waited for the joke, the insult, the mockery. But none of that ever came. From that day onward, Kelvin began sitting beside her during lunch. Every day. And he still didn't talk to her, or try to cajole her into helping him out with his lyrics. He would just eat, sometimes humming softly under his breath, sometimes tapping rhythms on the table. Nina tried not to notice him, but his presence was impossible to ignore. People stared. Whispers followed them. Rumors spread like wildfire. Why is he sitting with her? Is he dating her? Maybe it's a bet. Nina pretended not to hear, but every word dug into her skin. Still, Kelvin never treated her badly. Never laughed at her. Never made her feel small. Then one day, he walked into the cafeteria and didn't see Nina at her usual spot. A strange unease settled in his chest. He scanned the room once. Then again. She wasn't there. Leaving his food untouched, he walked out, asking around until someone mentioned seeing Nina head toward the practice studios. When he got there, he heard it, a soft melody floating through the hallway, fragile and beautiful. He followed the sound and found her inside one of the practice rooms, seated by the piano, lost in her music. "You play like you've lived 1,000 lives just playing that piano," he said softly, after watching her for what felt like hours, noticing how invested she had been in her craft. Nina startled, her hands freezing on the keys as she heard his voice. She turned slowly, fear flickering in her eyes. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he added quickly. I love listening to you play all the time. I wish I had half the talent that you have." Her lips twitched, not sure of the words to say in response to his statement. "I didn't see you at lunch today," he said after a few moments of silence. Kelvin leaned casually against the doorframe of the practice room, a familiar smile playing on his lips, but it faltered almost immediately when Nina didn't look up. She sat on the piano bench with her hands folded tightly in her lap, shoulders hunched as though she was trying to make herself smaller than she already was. "I wasn't hungry," Nina replied softly, her eyes fixed on the floor. Kelvin frowned. That wasn't like her. Even on days she barely spoke, she always ate something, especially when he shared his lunch with her. He pushed himself off the doorframe and took a few steps closer. That was when he noticed it. The way she flinched slightly when he came too near. The way her sleeves were tugged down despite the heat in the room. "Nina," he said gently, lowering his voice. "Look at me." She hesitated, then slowly raised her head. His breath caught. There were faint bruises on her cheekbone, yellowing at the edges, like they had been there for a while. When his eyes dropped to her arms, he saw more, dark marks peeking out from beneath her sleeves, finger-shaped bruises blooming against her brown skin. Something inside Kelvin snapped. "What happened to you?" he asked sharply, the calm in his voice evaporating. Nina instinctively pulled her sleeves down further. "It's nothing. I fell down the stairs yesterday." Kelvin stared at her, disbelief etched across his face. "You fell down the stairs," he repeated slowly. "And you got bruises on your arms? On your face?" She swallowed. "Yes." He crouched in front of her, his voice rising despite his attempt to keep it controlled. "Nina, don't lie to me. Who did this to you?" She shook her head quickly. "Please, it's fine. I don't want any trouble." His jaw clenched. "Who did this to you?" he asked again, his voice louder now, echoing slightly in the room. For a moment, she stayed silent, her fingers twisting together until her knuckles turned white. Then her shoulders sagged, as if the weight of the secret was finally too much to bear. "They said I should stay away from you," she whispered. "They said, if I don't, they'll make sure I regret it." Kelvin didn't need her to say the names. He could already tell who they were without hearing their names from her. Daniel. And his friends. Rage flooded his veins, hot and uncontrollable. He stood up so fast the piano bench scraped loudly against the floor. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the room. Nina jumped to her feet. "Kelvin, please, don't." But he was already gone. By the time Kelvin reached the open courtyard where Daniel and his crew usually hung out, his fists were clenched so tight his nails bit into his palms. Daniel spotted him first and nudged the others, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Look who finally came to his senses," Daniel sneered. "Guess you're done babysitting the scholarship girl." They laughed. Kelvin didn't slow down. He walked straight up to Daniel and, without warning, swung his fist. The punch landed squarely on Daniel's face with a sickening crack. The laughter died instantly. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Daniel stumbled backward, clutching his nose. When he pulled his hand away, blood smeared his fingers. His eyes widened in shock, then burned with fury. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Daniel shouted. Kelvin stepped closer, his voice low but thunderous. "The next person who lays a hand on Nina or says anything mean to her," he said, every word sharp and deliberate, "will have to deal with me." The courtyard was dead silent. "You think your money protects you?" Kelvin continued. "Try me again and see how far that gets you." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Daniel seething and the entire school buzzing with disbelief. Kelvin went straight back to Nina. "You're going to the clinic," he said firmly when he found her pacing the practice room. "Now." "I told you, you didn't have to do that," Nina protested weakly later as the school nurse cleaned her wounds and wrapped bandages around her arms. "Daniel will be very mad at you. And, here's your friend." Kelvin scoffed. "Friend?" He shook his head. "I don't care. I don't like what they do to you, and it's time someone stopped them." The nurse glanced between them knowingly and quietly excused herself. A strange warmth bloomed in Nina's chest at his words. No one had ever stood up for her like that. No one had ever made her feel like she was worth fighting for. Her cheeks warmed, a shy blush spreading across her face. From that day on, everything changed. She agreed to help him out with his lyrics, and they soon found themselves spending every extra time they had in school together, practicing and mastering their craft. Kelvin and Nina grew inseparable. They walked together, sat together, and studied together. He shared his lunch with her openly now, draping his arm casually over the back of her chair, daring anyone to say a word. And no one did. Whispers followed them everywhere. Jealousy burned in the eyes of the girls Kelvin had rejected. They couldn't understand how, out of all the rich, beautiful girls in the school, he chose Nina. The poor girl. The scholarship girl. But Kelvin didn't care. And slowly, neither did Nina. Kelvin played her his unfinished songs, watching her face closely as she listened. Nina would pause him, point out weak lyrics, and suggest changes. She helped him find metaphors, depth, emotion, things he had never known how to access on his own. "You need to feel it," she told him once. "Not just say it. That's the only way your audience can connect with whatever you are writing." His music transformed under her guidance, and Kelvin thrived. Every breakthrough filled him with joy. Nina smiled at his excitement, content with the friendship he freely offered her. Somewhere along the line, she stopped practicing her own pieces. She skipped deadlines. She forgot about the record deal she had come to school for. Everything became about Kelvin, his songs, his dreams, his success. And then one evening, under the dim lights of the music room, Kelvin took her hands in his. "I like you, Nina," he said softly. "I want more than this. I want you to be my girlfriend." Her breath left her in a rush. She stared at him, stunned. Kelvin, the popular, rich, admired Kelvin, wanted her. She nodded before fear could catch up with her thoughts. "Yes," she whispered. From that day, Kelvin held her hand everywhere they went, proud and unashamed. She was in love. And she would do anything to keep him. Months later, when Kelvin invited her to dinner at his house, her heart raced with excitement and dread. "I want my parents to meet the woman I love," he said. "I want them to know that you are the one who has stolen my heart." Nina blushed at the sound of Kelvin's words, but even as warmth spread through her chest, fear crept in quietly behind it. A part of her knew it was a bad idea. She had heard stories, whispers passed around campus and rumors that carried weight. Kelvin's parents were opulent, influential people, the kind whose names appeared in newspapers and whose presence alone could intimidate rooms full of grown men. People like that didn't break bread with girls like Nina. They didn't open their homes to daughters of carpenters and roadside food sellers. "I don't think it's a good idea," she told Kelvin one evening, wringing her hands together. "Your parents won't like me." Kelvin laughed softly, pulling her closer. "They don't have to like you immediately. I just want them to know you. I have told them so much about you." The word love weakened her resolve. After days of cajoling, reassurance, and promises that everything would be fine, Nina finally agreed. That same week, Kelvin took her shopping and bought her an expensive gown from a popular designer. When she wore it for the first time, standing before the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The fabric hugged her body perfectly, elegant and soft, and for once, she felt pretty without having to convince herself. Still, her nerves grew heavier as the day approached. On the evening of the dinner, her mother stood behind her, adjusting the neckline of her gown with careful hands. Her eyes were tired but kind. "They don't have to accept you," her mother said gently. "But the fact that you got entrance into their world means you won't remain like this forever. It's a start." Nina swallowed hard and nodded, letting those words settle into her chest like armor. The driver that Kelvin sent arrived shortly after. As the car pulled away from her familiar street, Nina pressed her palms together and whispered a silent prayer. She needed strength more than courage. Kelvin's house was nothing like she had imagined, because imagination could never have prepared her for it. The gates opened smoothly, revealing a massive driveway lined with golden lights that glowed softly against the night sky. The mansion stood tall and imposing, glass and marble gleaming like something out of a dream. Nina's eyes widened as she took it all in. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if she had stepped into heaven by mistake. Kelvin stood at the end of the driveway, waiting for her. He wore a tailored suit that fit him perfectly, confidence and excitement written all over his face. When the car came to a halt, he hurried forward, opening the door for her and pulling her into a warm hug. "You look incredible," he whispered. Her heart fluttered, and for a second, the fear eased. Inside, the house smelled expensive, polished wood, perfume, and something foreign she couldn't name. Uniformed staff moved silently around them. Nina felt painfully aware of every step she took, every breath she drew. Dinner was already set when they entered the dining room. The table was long and elegant, covered with dishes Nina couldn't recognize. Plates were arranged with multiple forks and spoons she had never used before. She sat stiffly beside Kelvin, her stomach grumbling loudly, but she couldn't bring herself to eat. Everything felt and looked strange and unfamiliar. She barely knew any of the dishes on the table, and so she settled for only water and juice while the rest of them ate in silence. Kelvin's parents sat across from them. His father was tall and stern, his eyes sharp and calculating. His mother was a very fair woman with heavy makeup on her face, her lips painted perfectly, her expression unreadable. "You are not going to eat?" Kelvin's mother asked suddenly, her eyes narrowing when she noticed Nina's untouched plate. Nina's heart skipped. "We threw an elaborate feast for you at our son's request," the woman continued, her nose scrunching slightly. "And you're not eating." "I don't recognize any of the dishes," Nina confessed honestly, her voice trembling as her eyes scanned the table again. "If I can have jollof rice, I would be more than glad to eat it." Kelvin swallowed hard beside her. His mother scoffed, a sound sharp and mocking. "This," she said, turning to Kelvin with open disgust, "is who you bring into our home." Nina's chest tightened. "A lowlife," the woman continued coldly, "who knows nothing about proper dining manners and can't even recognize fine dining when she sees it." The words struck Nina like slaps. Kelvin stiffened. "Mum, that's enough." His mother arched a perfectly shaped brow, clearly unimpressed. "Enough," she echoed. "Kelvin, look at her. Look at where she comes from. This is not the kind of woman who carries the Evans name. You don't expect a toad to turn into a princess simply because you got her a pretty dress. Nina's throat tightened. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to apologize for existing in a place she clearly did not belong. I didn't come here to cause any trouble, Nina finally said, her voice trembling but steady enough to surprise even herself. If I've offended you by not knowing your food, I'm sorry. His father finally spoke, his voice calm but cutting. Kelvin, you must understand something. You are expected to take on responsibilities far bigger than yourself. You need a partner who understands our world. Nina felt herself shrinking into her chair. I understand, she said softly, though no one had asked her. I would never want to hold Kelvin back. His mother smiled thinly. Intentions don't change the reality of who you are, my dear child. And if you really care about my son, you would leave him alone. Dinner ended shortly after that, cold and unfinished. The ride back was quiet. Kelvin apologized over and over, anger and shame mixing in his voice, but Nina barely heard him. Her thoughts were too loud. When she finally got home, she carefully removed the gown and folded it away like something fragile. Only then did the tears come. She stared at the calendar on her wall and realized she had missed the submission deadline for the project required for the record deal. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her chest tightened, the realization settling slowly, painfully. This had been her dream for the longest time. This was the reason she had endured the mocking and backlashes she had received when she started going to that school. And she had let it slip through her fingers without even noticing. Her heart broke quietly in her chest. But Nina was not someone who gave up easily. The next morning, she made a decision to make amends, no matter what it would cost her. That entire week, she avoided Kelvin. Not because she was angry with him, but because she was angry with herself. She went the other way whenever she saw him approaching, ducked into classrooms, stayed late in the practice studios long after everyone else had gone home. Every spare moment was spent working on her project, rewriting, practicing, refining her project until her fingers ached and her voice grew hoarse. Music became her refuge again. When she was finally satisfied and gathered the courage to submit her project, she went straight to the music department's team leader. Mr. Sam barely looked up from his desk when she entered. You're late, he said flatly after she explained herself. The window has closed. You'll have to wait for the next one, or forfeit the opportunity entirely. The words hit her hard. I can't, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Sir, please. I worked too hard for this. Mr. Sam sighed, already turning back to his papers. Rules are rules, Nina. Leave my office. But she refused to accept it. Every morning, she showed up at his office. Sometimes before classes. And in the evening after classes, she was there too. She waited quietly, standing outside his door, refusing to leave. Other times, she knocked, pleaded, explained again and again why this opportunity mattered to her. Days passed, and Mr. Sam wasn't yielding. Then one morning, when she walked into his office yet again, ready to give up if he didn't give in this time. But much to her surprise, Mr. Sam rolled his eyes heavily when he saw her there again. You're stubborn, he muttered. And you certainly don't know how to give up. Nina lowered her head, bracing herself for yet another rejection. Bring the project, he added. Her head snapped up, her eyes rounding in shock. Sir. You're lucky, he said dryly. You seem to have friends in very high places. Protocols were adjusted because of you. Her heart skipped. She instantly knew who this friend in high places was. Kelvin. It had to be him. Guilt washed over her instantly. She had been avoiding him for days, punishing him for a dinner that wasn't his fault, all while he had quietly stepped in to save her dream. She knew she owed him an apology. And she knew exactly where to find him. The practice studio door was slightly ajar when she arrived. Soft piano notes drifted into the hallway. They were uneven, but she knew the notes and knew what was off with the key Kelvin was playing. Kelvin sat at the piano, messing around with a melody, his shoulders relaxed as he played. He looked up when the door creaked. She put up a sulking face when their eyes met, wearing her apology before she said it. There you are, he said gently, smiling. I thought you were going to avoid me forever. Nina's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry. She walked closer, her head bowed. I shouldn't have shut you out after what happened. I didn't know how to deal with everything that happened, and I also needed to concentrate so I could work on my project. Kelvin stood up immediately. I'm the one who should be apologizing, he said softly. What my parents said to you. It was wrong. They were wrong. She shook her head. You don't have to fight them for me. I'm not fighting them, he said softly. I'm choosing you. Her breath caught. I love you, Nina, he continued. With or without their approval. Nothing they say would ever change the way I feel for you. Warmth flooded her chest, easing wounds she hadn't realized were still open. He pulled her into a tight hug, holding her like he was afraid she might disappear. Silent promises passed between them in that moment. "Thank you," she whispered, "for helping with my submission." He frowned slightly. "I didn't." She smiled sadly. "You don't have to deny it," she rebuked calmly. "I know it was you. And I'm grateful." They reconciled that day, slipping easily back into the rhythm they once had. Kelvin would sneak her into his house when his parents weren't around, and they would spend long hours talking, laughing, practicing their keys and lyrics, and doing other things. Other times, he visited her in her small home in the trenches of their city, sitting on wooden chairs with her family, laughing loudly with her siblings, eating jollof rice and fried plantain with his hands like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a while, things felt perfect again. Nina would look at Kelvin and smile, her heart warming in a way that didn't feel natural. Everything was going well until one day. Kelvin wasn't in school when she came to school that day. At first, Nina brushed it off. Kelvin could be notorious for coming late, because he knew his parents had enough money to bail him out should he get into any trouble. But then the hours passed and the day ended, and Kelvin was not in school yet. Panic settled in her chest. She didn't have a phone to call him. She waited until school was over before heading straight to his house, anger and worry mixing in her stomach. She planned to scold him, tell him he couldn't just skip school because he was rich and had a billion naira inheritance waiting for him, even if he didn't get to complete his studies. When she got to the gate of his family's estate, the security men refused to let her in. As she argued with them, a Rolls-Royce drove past. Her heart dropped when she saw Kelvin's mother inside. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed briefly in the woman's gaze, then hardened into a frown. Disgust followed swiftly, and she turned her face away as if Nina was something unpleasant she didn't want to acknowledge. The gates opened briefly to let the car in and closed afterward, remaining closed despite Nina's pleas to see Kelvin. Nina went home with a heavy heart, praying that Kelvin was fine. He didn't come to school the next day, or the day after that. By the end of the week, rumors spread like wildfire when he was still nowhere to be found. Kelvin was sick. Kelvin was in the hospital. Kelvin was fighting for his life. Nina didn't believe her ears. She didn't even wait for school to be over that day before she left. She went back to his house and refused to leave until she was let in. Hours later, she stood in the living room as Kelvin's sister broke the news. Kidney failure. They were waiting for a donor match. No one in the family was compatible. It took her several minutes to process that part of the information. Memories of all their times together, all the promises they had made to each other, replayed in her head as she stood there, too frozen to say anything. She begged to see him. When they finally let her see him, and she walked into that hospital room, her heart shattered. Kelvin lay in the hospital bed, paler than she had ever seen him, tubes and machines attached to his body. He looked fragile, nothing like the boy who once strode confidently through campus. Kelvin smiled the moment he saw her, that familiar wide smile that always warmed her heart in more ways than she could contain. "I thought you were never going to come," he teased weakly, reaching out to hold her. "I was already preparing myself for the dramatic heartbreak. I thought that you were going to leave me now that you know that I'm sick and dying." Nina scoffed, blinking back tears as she moved closer to the bed. "You're so stupid," she said, punching him lightly on the elbow. "Don't ever say that again." He chuckled, then winced slightly. "I'm never leaving you," she continued, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. "Not now. Not ever. You know how much I love you." His smile softened, eyes lingering on her face like he was memorizing it. "That's good," he said. "Because I have news." Her brows furrowed. "What kind of news?" "Mr. Sam came to see me yesterday," Kelvin told her. Her heart skipped. "Wow," she managed to say, blinking hard. Kelvin's eyes sparkled with mischief. "He told me that the results for the project you submitted the other time are out." Nina sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers curling into the bedsheet. "What?" "They're announcing it during assembly on Friday," he continued. "But I didn't let him leave until he told me who made it to the list." She leaned closer, curiosity shooting up her spine. "You made it, Nina," he said, grinning. "You're one of the 2 students selected for the recording deal. You'll be traveling to South Africa at the end of the month." For a moment, the world stopped. Her ears rang. Her vision blurred. "You're joking," she whispered. "I'm not," Kelvin said softly. "You did it. You're about to change your family's life. You're going to be a star." Tears spilled freely now as she laughed and cried at the same time, clutching his hand like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Joy surged through her veins, wild and overwhelming. When the announcement was finally made at school, the assembly hall erupted with gasps, cheers, and applause. Nina was happy. But she was also painfully aware of the empty seat where Kelvin should have been. Painfully aware that he should be there, rejoicing with her at her big win. At lunch, she sat quietly, replaying the moment over and over in her head when Daniel and his goons approached her table. Well, well, Daniel sneered. Looks like your bodyguard isn't around anymore. Nina stiffened but said nothing. You should be careful, one of them added, leaning closer. You should watch your back now. Now that it seems that Kelvin might not even make it back to school alive. God forbid, Nina snapped, standing abruptly, spitting to the ground with so much vigor. They broke out into loud laughs. So that's the big win. Daniel continued, a large smirk forming on his face. A handout recording deal? Must be nice. Your family is so broke you had to rely on pity to escape poverty. Nina clenched her fists. One of them stepped closer, eyes roaming over her body. My dad owns one of the biggest studios in Nigeria. He even works with Don Jazzy and D-Prince sometimes. If you really wanted that recording deal, all you had to do was... His hand reached for her, trying to touch her inappropriately. That was the last straw. Nina shot up from her chair, rage blazing in her eyes, and without hesitation, her palm connected sharply with his face, the sound of the hot slap she had given him echoing through the cafeteria. Gasps escaped the lips of the other boys present with them, including Daniel. The boy she had slapped stumbled back, eyes widening in shock as the scene drew the attention of the other students in the cafeteria. She was called to the principal's office for the first time that day. After a long deliberation, she was given a week's suspension. She didn't care. All that mattered was that she'd be back to school in time for the South African trip, and the suspension was going to give her more space to spend as much time as she needed in the hospital with Kelvin. That afternoon, when she went to see him, she told him everything that happened in school that day. She told him about the announcements, about Daniel and the slap, and about the suspension. Kelvin laughed weakly. That's my girl, he said, praising her for finally learning to stand up to Daniel on her own. I'll talk to my parents to speak to the principal, he promised afterward. They came for you first, and you shouldn't be serving punishment for something they did. You don't have to do that, she told him gently. The suspension only gives me more time to spend with you, she added with a genuine smile. She visited Kelvin every day, sometimes staying so long that the nurses had to remind her visiting hours were over. But as the days passed, his laughter grew weaker. Some days, he barely spoke. Other days, he just lay there, eyes closed, machines doing more work than his body could manage. Fear settled deep in Nina's chest. How long before you find a donor? She asked one evening, brushing his fingers gently. He sighed. So far, all the donors we have found didn't match, he told her weakly. At this point, we're just hoping that some kind of miracle happens. The word miracle echoed painfully in her chest. And then, almost without thinking, she said it. I want to take the test, she told him. I want to know if I am a match. Kelvin's eyes flew open, and for several minutes, he couldn't say a word. No, he said, with a firm expression. I'm serious, Nina insisted. I won't let you, he told her, shaking his head. Absolutely not. There is no way I am letting you take that test. We will wait for as long as it takes to get a donor. I am certain that it won't be long before one shows up anyway. She squeezed his hand, her eyes sinking deeper. Kelvin, we've waited 2 weeks. You're getting worse. What's the worst that could happen if I take the test? I might not even be a match at the end of the day. He looked at her for a long moment, conflict tearing through his expression. I don't want you to do this, Nina, he said softly. I don't want to put you in a dilemma. She smiled warmly. I know, she said. But it wouldn't hurt to know if I can be a donor or not. I am sure we will figure out something once we get the results. Finally, he nodded, agreeing to let her take the test. When the results came back, the room went silent. She was a match. And that was when the real drama began. Kelvin's mother arrived with lawyers and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She offered Nina money in a bid to convince her to be a donor. Nina's eyes widened when she heard the amount they were willing to pay her for her kidney, but she quickly reminded herself that if she was going to do this, she wouldn't be doing it for the money. She would do this because she was in love with Kelvin and she wanted to keep him alive. Her parents were furious when she broke the news that she was a match and was considering donating her kidney to Kelvin. We didn't suffer so hard to raise you, just so that you can donate your body parts to people who looked down on us, her father thundered, reminding her of the humiliation and insults she had suffered at the hands of the family she was trying to save their son. That evening, her house was filled with arguments, everyone trying to point out the various reasons why she shouldn't go ahead with a stupid plan like that. Her parents couldn't even bear to look her in the eyes as they said all those hurtful words to her. It's bad enough that you went and got tested without telling us, her mother said in between sobs. And now, you want to risk your life for that boy. I am not risking my life, Nina snapped, already tired of everything. I am trying to save his life. Her father let out a bitter laugh. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about giving away your kidney as if it's a book you borrowed. It's Kelvin I am giving it to, Nina replied, her chest tightening. He's not just anybody. And I am doing this because I love him. Her father scoffed as though that was the silliest thing he had ever heard. Love? What the hell do you know about love? That boy and his family have brought you nothing but humiliation since you met him. Nina shook her head. That's not true, Nina insisted. Kelvin has always been there for me when I needed him. He stood up for me in school when other students looked down on me. He helped me with the submission that got me this recording deal, which will take me to South Africa in a few days. Without him, I wouldn't have even qualified for it. Her mother scoffed. And without him, you wouldn't have missed the deadline either. Don't twist the story to suit your emotions. The words stung, but Nina refused to cry. She had cried enough already. I love him, she said quietly. And he loves me. Her father finally looked at her then, his eyes heavy with worry rather than anger. Love does not replace common sense, Nina. You are young. You have siblings. What happens tomorrow if one of them needs a transplant? What happens if you fall sick and need that same kidney you are about to give away to someone who is not even your blood? Her mother's voice softened, but only slightly. We are poor, Nina. We don't have the kind of money his family has. We cannot afford mistakes like this. Nina listened. She really did. She absorbed every fear, every warning, every trembling possibility they threw at her. But her heart had already crossed a line her body still stood behind. Her mind was already made up. She wasn't going to let Kelvin die when she could do something about it. Kelvin was the only person who had seen her like a human being in the entire school filled with stuck-ups and snobs. He had loved her in a world that despised people like her. Kelvin is dying, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. He's getting weaker every day. I sit there and watch him struggle to breathe, Mama. I watch his smile fade. How do I live with myself if I walk away knowing I could have helped him? Her mother turned her face away, blinking rapidly, her expression distraught. You are choosing him over your family. No, Nina said, stepping forward. I am choosing to save a life. Her father stood up abruptly. Enough. This discussion is over. You will not do this thing. Do you hear me? Nina swallowed hard. I hear you, Daddy. But none of you is going to stop me. If my kidney is what Kelvin needs to live even if it is another day, then I am more than willing to give it to him. That night, Nina went to bed replaying the thick disappointment that her parents wore after their arguments that night. But she knew she could not live with the guilt of not helping Kelvin out. The next morning, she went straight to the hospital. Kelvin looked worse. His skin had lost some of its color, his eyes sunken. His smile took longer time to form when he saw her. But it still came, and that was enough to make her chest ache. You look tired, he teased weakly. Did you fight with the whole world again last night? He added, as though he could already tell what happened at her house last night. She smiled sadly and sat beside him. Just my parents, she told him, stroking his head with admiration. He sighed. I knew this would cause problems, that's why I never wanted you to take that test in the first place. It doesn't matter, she said, taking his hand. I've made my decision. I am a match, and I am going to give you my kidney. Kelvin shook his head immediately. Nina, no. I told you, we can wait. My parents are looking for donors. They can pay. I'm tired of waiting, she interrupted softly. Tired of praying for miracles that don't show up. I want to help you. He stared at her, his eyes glossy. And what if something happens to you? Nothing is going to happen to me, she replied. I know that there would be risks, but I am willing to go to any length not to lose you. I don't want to live in a world where you are not in. He exhaled shakily, lost for words. Then you should take the money my mother is offering you, he said finally. Nina blinked. Not sure that she had heard him right. What? My parents are willing to pay you, he repeated, avoiding her eyes. You should take the money. They were going to pay for a donor anyway. You should get something from this if you are going to donate. The words felt like a slap. She pulled her hand from his and stood up slowly. Kelvin, don't ever say that to me again. He looked up, startled and slightly confused, silently wondering if he had said something wrong. Kelvin, I am not doing this because I want your money or anything, she said, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. If I wanted the money, I would have taken it when your mother offered it to me yesterday. I don't think I need your approval for that. Kelvin's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She lowered herself back to him, their eyes locking with each other. I am doing this because I love you, and no, my love is not for sale. Silence fell between them, Thick with emotions both of them weren't ready to feel just yet. I just didn't want you to lose everything, he whispered, tears finally streaking down his cheeks. I'm not losing anything, she said softly. I'm choosing you. He turned away, too ashamed to look at her in that moment. I don't deserve you, he muttered to himself. You don't get to decide that, Nina said when she heard him. When Kelvin's parents were informed of Nina's decision, his mother cried tears of relief, holding Nina's hands and calling her a blessing. She promised that Nina would be compensated with an even larger sum than she had proposed to give Nina earlier. I don't want your money, Nina told her firmly. I just want Kelvin to live. All the due diligence was observed, and everything was finalized, and the date for the operation was finally set. Unluckily for them, it was 2 days before the trip to South Africa. You won't make it for the trip if you do the operation, Kelvin said one evening, his voice heavy with guilt. You'll miss everything you worked for. Nina smiled. It's only 2 days away from the trip, she told him. I am sure that I will be well rested before the end of those 2 days if I do the operation. He shook his head. You're unbelievable. She chuckled. You are going to be alive, she replied. That's all that matters. That night, in the dim hospital room, surrounded by machines humming softly, Kelvin reached for her face with trembling fingers. I don't know how to thank you, he whispered. Just don't die and leave me alone in this world, she said. He leaned forward, his lips brushing against her, asking permission with his eyes. Nina closed the distance herself. Their first kiss was gentle, soaked in promises they had made each other over and over again. They clung to each other, two young hearts choosing love in a world determined to make them see why they would never work out together. And for the first time in a long time, Nina felt certain that no matter what came next, she had done the right thing. The day of the operation finally arrived. Nina barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw images she couldn't quite control. Bright surgical lights, masked faces, Kelvin's pale smile fading into nothing. When morning came, she dressed slowly, her hands trembling as she buttoned her hospital gown, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might burst through her chest. Her parents stood at the foot of the bed, their faces drawn tight with fear and anger. You are out of your mind, her mother said for the third time that morning. Completely out of your mind. Her father looked at her with heaviness in his eyes. You can still change your mind now, Nina, he told her. You don't have to give up something like this to save him. Nina swallowed hard, her lips twitching. I don't expect any of you to understand, she said softly. Her mother scoffed bitterly. I know you're scared, Nina continued gently. I'm scared too. Then stop this madness, her father snapped. Come home with us. Let the doctors and his parents find another donor. There is no time, Nina replied. And I can't walk away now. Not when I know I can help him. Her mother's voice broke. You will regret this. Maybe she would. Maybe she wouldn't. But Nina knew one thing for certain. She would regret doing nothing far more. When the nurses came to wheel her into the theater, her parents followed, their protests growing more desperate with every step. Please, her mother whispered, gripping her hand tightly. Please don't do this. Nina squeezed her hand back. I'll be okay. She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince them or herself. Against their wishes, against their pleas, Nina was rolled into the operating room. The bright lights blinded her momentarily, the smell of antiseptic sharp in her nose. As the anesthetist spoke calmly, explaining the process, Nina's thoughts drifted to Kelvin. Please live, she prayed silently. Please come out of this healthy. The mask descended, the world blurred, and then everything went dark. The operation was successful for Kelvin. But complications arose while they were trying to stitch Nina back up. She began bleeding profusely, and the doctors quickly discovered that her body was reacting poorly to the trauma of the surgery. She slipped into unconsciousness after that and was placed in a coma for several days. Her parents remained at her side, keeping vigil and praying that she came out of this alive. Kelvin recovered faster. When he was finally strong enough to walk, he insisted on being taken to her room. The sight of her lying there, still, pale, connected to tubes, nearly broke him. This is my fault, he whispered, gripping her hand. All of this. Days turned into a week. Then another. When Nina finally opened her eyes, the world felt strange, as though she was waking up in someone else's body. Her throat was dry, her limbs heavy, her head pounding with dull pain. Her mother gasped and rushed to her side, tears spilling freely now. Nina, thank God. Her father called for the doctor, his hands shaking as he held hers. You've been in a coma for 9 days, the doctor explained gently later. But you're stable now. 9 days. Reality slowly settled in. The trip. South Africa. When she asked, her parents exchanged glances. Her heart sank before they even answered. You missed it, her mother said softly. For a moment, Nina felt the sting of that news. It was almost unbearable. What about Kelvin? She asked, swallowing heavily. She needed to know if it was worth it. If any of the risks she had taken were worth it in the end. He is alive, her parents told her, still in disbelief that despite all that happened, she was still worried about the same person who had put her in this condition. But she didn't care. She was alive. Kelvin was alive. And that was enough. That was all that mattered to her. When Kelvin finally walked into her room later that day, she almost cried. He looked different. He was stronger, healthier, and the bright colors had returned to his face. His smile was larger than she had ever seen it. I am so glad that you are awake now, he whispered, kneeling beside her bed, a few tears slipping from him as well. You almost scared me. She smiled weakly. He took her hand, pressing it to his lips. I am sorry that you missed the trip. I know how hard you worked to get that slot. It was worth it, she told him. You are alive, and that is all that matters. I am certain that there would be other deals in the future, even bigger deals. Those words broke Kelvin's heart. He swore an oath to her that day, promising her that he would never leave her alone. She laughed softly. You sound very confident. I am, he said firmly. I love you. You have done for me what no one will ever do for me in this life, and for that reason, I swear that I will love you until my final breath. For this sacrifice, I will make sure that you become the star that you always wanted to be. I will make sure that you actualize every last one of your goals. And I will stand by you through it all. I will love you forever, and a time when I will stop loving you will never come. He made so many other promises to her that night, and she believed him. She etched every word into her heart and locked them away in a place that was safe and untouchable. Her recovery was slow, but with time, she was back to her normal self. But the scolding never ended. Her parents reminded her daily of what she had given up, her kidney and a recording deal that would have changed her life. But none of their words affected her. Her joy was full, and no missed opportunity could dim it. When they were finally discharged and returned home, Kelvin visited her every chance he got. A few months down the line, they graduated from high school. It was the best time of their lives. Nina hadn't been the valedictorian like she had always hoped she would be, but the fact that she and Kelvin were alive to witness that day gave her more than enough reason to be grateful. The weeks following her graduation became even better. Most days, Kelvin never let her leave his side until it was necessary for her to do so. And slowly, their conversation turned into plans, big, beautiful plans for their future together. We should leave Nigeria now that we are done with high school, Kelvin said one afternoon. Go continue our education in a new country, where it would be just the two of us there. Where are you thinking? Nina asked him, a blush tugging shamelessly at her cheeks. We can go to the States, he told her. There are so many colleges we could apply to over there. That way, we can both be together as we study and chase our dreams of becoming big superstars. The plan seemed interesting, but when Nina reminded him that her family didn't have the funds for it, he told her he would take care of it. It took him months to convince his parents to sponsor Nina's college tuition, and he resorted to blackmailing them and reminding them that he wouldn't be alive if Nina hadn't saved him. His parents eventually agreed to his requests, and they immediately began the arrangements, submitting necessary documents and every other thing needed for their plan to come to fruition. Nina's heart soared as the days closed in on the time they would be leaving Nigeria. She found herself daydreaming constantly, imagining a life where it was just her and Kelvin, far away from judgment and the whispered insults of his parents about her status. A life where their love for each other was more than enough. We can't allow him to be with that girl, Kelvin's mother said to her husband one evening. If we let him leave Nigeria with that girl, there's no way we can stop him from being with her. Kelvin's father sighed. She saved his life. That does not make her suitable for our son, she snapped. Don't you know what she is? The type of family she's from. She's far below our son, Kelvin. Kelvin should be with someone who understands wealth and privilege the way he does, and not with someone who has lived in poverty all her life, feeding from hand to mouth. Kelvin doesn't seem to mind that she's not from a well-to-do family, her husband reminded her. And the girl had refused to take our money even when we offered. That makes her more dangerous, she replied calmly. She thinks love is enough for them. That kind of thinking ruins boys like Kelvin. We must take her out of the way, so that Kelvin can concentrate on other things, important things that actually matter. He studied his wife's face carefully. So what do you suggest? She smiled, a slow, calculated smile that sent a chill down his spine. We sabotage their trip, she said simply. His brows furrowed. How? Her smile widened. Leave that to me. And in that moment, he knew that his wife was up to no good, and that whatever she had planned, it was already in motion. What about Nina? Kelvin asked, his voice tight and already edged with suspicion as he stood in his mother's study, the tall glass windows behind her framing the manicured garden outside. His mother barely looked up from the documents spread across her desk when she broke the news to him. An early opening had come up in the school he had applied to in the US, an opening so rare and lucrative that turning it down would be considered foolish. We were supposed to leave together, he added, taking a step closer. I can't leave her here. His mother finally lifted her eyes to him. She will come later, she told him, sounding convincing. I'm sure she wouldn't want you to miss something this important just because she wants you to wait for her. Kelvin shook his head in disbelief. You don't understand, he said fiercely. She missed her recording deal because she wanted to save my life. Because of me. Surely I can sacrifice this spot for her. I'll wait for the next opening. The room went still. Rage flared instantly in his mother's eyes, burning so hot it startled him. She stood abruptly, slamming her palms on the table. Do you know what I had to do to get you this spot? She demanded. Do you know how many people I had to speak to? How many palms I greased? Kelvin flinched. You are a spoilt brat, she continued, her voice rising. You know nothing about real hard work. All your life, you have been shielded by the comfort and privileges that I and your father had provided you. Everything you have is because of our hard work. And now you want to throw it away for a girl. She's not just any girl, Kelvin snapped, his voice rising sharply. She saved my life. I don't care, his mother screamed. I am not leaving Nigeria with her, Kelvin insisted, his fists clenching by his sides. His mother laughed sharply. You are taking that spot, she said coldly. And that is final. If you lose this opportunity because of that girl, then you can say goodbye to this family name and everything it has ever given you. If you don't take this spot, then you leave me with no other option than to disown you. Kelvin felt something inside him fracture at the drop of those words. He couldn't believe that his mother would say such things to him. He quickly went in search of the only person who would make everything that his mother said to him make sense. He went straight to see Nina that evening. She noticed that something was wrong the minute she saw him. The redness of his eyes, the heaviness in his shoulders, the way he avoided her gaze. What happened? She asked softly. Kelvin told her everything. He told her about the spot, about the argument with his mother, about the threat that still rang loudly in his ears. His voice cracked as he spoke, shame and helplessness bleeding through every word. When he was done, silence filled the room. Nina stared at him for a long moment, her chest aching. Then she reached for his hands. You should take the spot, she said gently. Kelvin pulled back, glaring at her as though she had just betrayed him. Are you kidding me? He choked out. We planned to go to America together, he reminded her. Together. I know, Nina said, her voice trembling slightly. But you can't miss an opportunity like that because you're waiting for me. Are you kidding me? He asked bitterly. Nina swallowed. No, I'm not, she told him calmly. Your mother is right this time. Kelvin shook his head violently, surprised that she was even supporting his mother. I can't believe you're saying this. I know, and I can't believe that I am saying it either, she said, her voice cracking a little. But I can't sit here and watch you get cut off from everything you've known because of me, she said. You have to go. I'll come later. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to cry. She had already sacrificed too much to let this be the thing that broke them. After days of arguments, tears, and reassurances, Kelvin finally agreed. He would leave 1 month earlier, but he insisted that she mustn't come any day later than the day they had already planned that she would be in America. She chuckled and promised him that she wouldn't. The airport was loud and chaotic when she escorted him there on the day he was to leave. Nina felt strangely numb as she stood beside him, her fingers intertwined with his. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Don't cry, Kelvin said softly, pulling her into a tight hug. It's just 1 month. He reached into his bag and brought out a sleek box. I got you this. She opened it and gasped. Kelvin, an iPhone. I want to keep up with you, he said, smiling. I don't want to miss you too much before you join me. Nina laughed through her tears, hugging him tightly. Thank you. They held each other until the final boarding call echoed through the hall. Kelvin kissed her forehead, whispered promises into her hair, and then, just like that, he was gone. Nina watched him disappear past security, her heart heavy but hopeful. 1 month, she told herself as she waved him one final goodbye when he turned to her. Just 1 month. She turned, and froze. Kelvin's mother was standing right behind her. Before Nina could react, the woman reached out and snatched the phone Kelvin had given her from her hand. It's already bad enough that you bewitched my son into planning a future with you, and promising to take you with him to the States, she hissed. But I will not let you have this. Nina stared at her in disbelief, shock rooting her to the spot. But she didn't argue. She wasn't even surprised by his mother's actions. She already knew the truth. Kelvin's mother hated her. She hated that her son had chosen a girl who came from nothing, a girl who didn't belong to their world. Nina lifted her chin. In less than a month, she would be out of the country, far away from this woman, alone with the love of her life. And nothing at all, could take that hope away from her. Or so she thought. When Nina got home that day, the house felt colder than usual. She barely had time to shut the door behind her before her parents' laughter rang out from the sitting room. It wasn't the light, joyful kind of laughter. It was sharp, bitter, and almost cruel. The kind that cut deeper because it came from people who were supposed to protect her. So you're finally back, her mother said to her, shaking her head slowly. You must be the most foolish child we have ever given birth to. Her father didn't even look at her. We told you, he said flatly. We warned you. They took turns tearing her down, their words piling up like stones on her chest. They told her Kelvin had left her. That the reason he traveled earlier than planned was because he no longer wanted her in his life. That she had thrown away her kidney, her future, and a recording deal that could have changed their family's destiny, for a boy who had now discarded her like she meant nothing. You sacrificed everything, her father said bitterly. Everything. For what? For a rich boy who would have already forgotten your name before he got on that flight. That boy has left you, Nina, her mother told her. He is not coming back. Just watch and see. But Nina was more than desperate to prove them wrong. She couldn't wait for the month to be over so that she would make them take back their words. She knew they were just speaking out of genuine concern for her. But more than anything, she knew Kelvin. He didn't leave me, she said calmly. You're wrong, and in a month, you will see. The two of you will watch me with your own two eyes leave Nigeria. They scoffed bitterly at her, their faces filled with disappointment. You're delusional, her mother snapped. Open your eyes, Nina. You are not going anywhere. But Nina didn't argue. She simply walked into her room and shut the door behind her. Inside the quiet of her small space, she sat on the edge of her bed and held on to one thought like a lifeline. 1 month. In 1 month, she would leave Nigeria. In 1 month, she would stand beside Kelvin again and prove everyone wrong. Kelvin was the love of her life. He had promised her. He wouldn't abandon her, not after everything they had been through. She believed that with everything she had. 2 weeks later, her world shifted. It started with nausea that wouldn't go away. Dizziness. A strange exhaustion clung to her bones. At first, she blamed it on stress, on recovery, on everything she had endured in the past months. But deep down, fear stirred. When the truth finally stared back at her, undeniable and cruel, Nina felt like the ground beneath her feet had vanished. She was pregnant. She sat on the cold bathroom floor for a long time, staring at nothing, her hands trembling. Her mind raced, replaying memories she hadn't meant to revisit. The hospital room, whispered promises, the night they had clung to each other like the world might end if they let go. There was no doubt who the father was. Kelvin. A sob rose to her throat, but she swallowed it back. There was no way she could tell her parents. Not now. Not after everything they had said. And there was no way to reach Kelvin. The phone he had given her was gone. Sending him emails felt pointless. So she decided to wait. Just 2 more weeks. She would tell him everything when she got to America. He loved her. He would be happy at the news, and together they will figure out a way to go about it. Those 2 weeks crawled by painfully slow. When the day finally came, Nina woke up filled with nervous excitement despite everything. She packed her small bag carefully, her heart pounding with anticipation. Her parents didn't say a word to her. They didn't wish her well. They didn't walk her to the door. They didn't even look at her. She left the house quietly, telling herself it didn't matter. Soon, everything would change. Kelvin's house loomed ahead of her, just as grand and intimidating as ever. She smiled nervously as she walked up to the gate, imagining Kelvin waiting for her outside the airport, waiting to receive her, imagining his grin, his arms around her, his voice telling her everything would be fine. The door opened, and she was led to the living room where Kelvin's mother sat today. Her smile was thin. Cold. I've been expecting you, she said. Nina stepped inside, her heart racing. I came for my ticket and documents, she said softly. We're supposed to. There is no trip for you, his mother cut in sharply. The words didn't register at first. What? Nina whispered. I cancelled everything, she said calmly. I cancelled everything the moment my son left the country. For a moment, Nina's heart stopped beating. Her ears rang. The room spun. She gripped the arm of a chair to keep herself upright. There must be a mistake, she said weakly. Kelvin said. Did you really think, his mother interrupted, her voice rising, that I would sit back and watch my son throw away his future for someone like you? The venom in her tone was unmistakable. Did you really think I would allow that? She thundered. You are a gold digger. A manipulator. You bewitched my poor son, and now you want him to abandon everything he knows to settle for you. Nina's lips trembled. That's not true, she said, tears finally spilling over. I love him. His mother laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Love, she scoffed. People like you don't love. You manipulate. Because that's the only way you got my only son to fall for you. She turned away briefly, then came back holding a bag. She threw it at Nina's feet. I know you saved his life, she said with barely concealed disgust. And that is the only reason I'm helping you. Nina stared at the bag, confused. That is 100 million naira, the woman continued. Take it. It should be more than enough to disappear from my son's life. I don't want you ever coming back here. Nina's knees went weak. With tears streaming down her face, she shook her head slowly. Even if I wanted to take the money and disappear, she said, her voice breaking, I can't. His mother frowned. Why not? Nina swallowed hard, one hand drifting instinctively to her stomach. Because, she whispered, I'm pregnant. The room went deadly silent. His mother stared at her, disbelief flashing across her face, then anger, then something darker. What did you say? She asked coldly. I'm carrying Kelvin's child, Nina repeated softly. I can't walk away now, it's too late. For a long moment, his mother said nothing. Then she smiled. And Nina knew, deep in her bones, that the real nightmare had only just begun. Hi. Thank you so much for sticking with me all the way to the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends. Let's spread the excitement. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, so you're the first to catch the next story when it drops.